Good morning. I am here today with the team leader of Impact Realty Group, Mr. Aaron Zapata. Thank you so much for being with us. Aaron is a very successful agent in our local North Orange County area and beyond, so we're really honored to have him today.
I've got almost 30 years of experience in the industry. And so we're in the middle of a big change in the industry, and none of us have seen the industry change as dramatically as it is right now. So I think it's great that we get to talk about it and share some insights with what I've seen in classes and kind of what I see on the street already as to how these changes are going to affect the market. For over 100 years in the nation, a seller would pay the listing agent and the buyer's agent commission out of their sales proceeds. And that is changing. And in fact, nowadays, when a listing is taken from a seller, a listing agent's agreement has no place on it in California to identify how much is going to be paid to a buyer's broker. Because we now have 3 agreements that govern a transaction. And those 3 agreements are the listing agreement, which is where the seller and the listing agent have an agreement as to what they're going to get paid for the work that they do to sell the home. Then there's the buyer and the buyer's agreement, that agreement dictates what they have to do with their buyer's agent and how that buyer's agent is going to get paid. And then we have the purchase contract, which is between a buyer and a seller. And that agreement is the purchase agreement that dictates who's going to pay for what in that transaction. So it used to be that there was no buyer's agency agreement. That was kind of a quasi-agreement. Most buyers did never sign an agreement with the buyer's agent, but now that's a requirement. And so now you have that new agreement that's going to dictate how a buyer gets represented and who pays for that representation fee.
Basically, the thought process is that the buyer would now be responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the seller does not agree to pay it, then the buyer will have to come up with funds to be able to do so. So how are you seeing the potential impact of this in our real estate market today?
So when I meet with our buyers now, I have to explain where their money's going. So if they have $200,000 and it's an 80-20 loan, they can buy $1 million property. Okay, but now you have to pay me because I'm your agent. Before, I used to guarantee get my money from the seller. That's now gone. So now we have to look at where that's going to get paid from. And assuming it's 2.5% on $1 million purchase, we now have to set aside $25,000 for my fee if the seller won't pay for it. And so we're really down to now $175,000. And if you still want to do an 80-20 loan, that means we're now looking at homes at $950,000. And so having that conversation is a big eye-opener with buyers because they've never had to consider that before. And the option, of course, as we work together is that we're going to try our best to make sure that the seller can still pay for that. But being that it's no longer a given, it is a property by property basis.
So this is the negotiation that you have with the seller.
Exactly. Would you like me to look at show you homes where we know matter of factly that we're not going to get any concessions from the seller? Most of them will be like, no, like we want $1 million homes. We still want to be able to buy $1 million home. And so if we have a seller that's unwilling to pay your fee, let's just not look at those. Hey, if buyers are kind of taking your house off the list because you're not going to negotiate any concessions or commission, and we're not supposed to say commission anymore, so it's really concessions. So if you're not going to offer any concessions to compensate the buyer's agent, do you want to just take it off the list entirely? Like, no. If the offer's good enough, obviously we'll consider it. So at the end of the day, we have a bunch of new forms that I don't think is going to change the market all that dramatically. It's just new forms.
Gotcha.
And we just now have a stated money flow, like where the money goes and how it was paid out. And it's very clear how it was paid out as opposed to before, it was all done through the seller directly to the buyer's agent.
So basically, having an educated agent, having somebody that is familiar with the industry and able to represent you on the best level is really going to be important right now, is basically what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's going to be a big divide between, agents that don't know the contract, that don't understand how it's changed, and those that are fully educated and on top of it. There was a question. If this agent is solely being paid for by the seller, do they really represent the interests of the client, the buyer, the best? Well, now there's no question. I get paid from you, the buyer. Part of my job is to get the seller to pay for my fees through you.
Right.
Now that buyer's agent is so important, more important than ever, because now they need to know where they're providing value. They need to know how to negotiate a contract. They need to know how to request for concessions. They need to know how to build rapport with the listing agent. They need to know all those things, because now they have a written contract with their buyer that says, I am your representative and yours alone, and I'm going to do what I do best, which is to represent you and not the seller. So those agents that really understand the buy side and the contract and how it's going to work are really going to, they're going to be worth what you pay them for. So a buyer shouldn't be nervous necessarily about compensating their agent.
Right, because they're going to be getting the value for what they're doing in the transaction.
Right. There are a lot of agents in Southern California. I mean, there's over 20,000 agents to pick from.
Just in our area. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so if you have that many agents and only half of them do any business at all, which is true, so of the 20,000, only 10 do multiple transactions a year, you're going to want to work with somebody that's at least been through this process. So those agents are going to rise to the top, because they're going to be able to have a presentation. They're going to be able to explain to their clients, here's what I'm paid for, here's what the value I bring, and here's how it works in real life.
As far as giving your buyer options in the mortgage industry, which is my field, do you guys look for our mortgage people to provide you with any additional information on this process, on how that, and how that would affect with the buyer and the relationship between the mortgage person and the buyer?
The relationship between a buyer's agent and now a lender is more important than ever, because again, you have new anomalies, you have new data that has to be incorporated into the purchase process. So, you, Tina, have to be able to say, okay, here's the different breakdowns. A, the seller doesn't compensate your buyer's agent at all. So now that's a closing cost that we have to incorporate into your deal. Option B, seller offsets some of those costs. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. Or C, your agent negotiates and you're able to write an offer that the seller pays everything. And having an agent that also a loan officer that also understands the different options and can explain that and be on the same page with the buyer's agent is so important.
Yeah, I think that'll really build the relationship between the lender or mortgage broker and the agent.
Yeah.
A lot of times there's some disconnect in the past between the agents and the lender, where now I think that's going to close a little bit, which will make the whole transaction, I think, more cohesive, in my opinion.
Right.
So I think there could be some good things that'll come out of this change.
Yes. Say the lender says one thing and the agent says something else, that creates confusion and division. And so having conversations with your loan officer at early stages, every stage of the way, is going to be crucial in terms of getting your clients all on the same page. So now you have that triangle of trust. You have the buyer, the lender, and the agent. And those three in communication with each other is super crucial. You as a loan officer need to make sure your relationships with your realtors are strong, so that you can provide the realtors with data that says, hey, here's the conversation now. With these changes, I want to be able to have a face-to-face conversation. Somebody in Kansas is not going to fly out here and walk through the the loan estimate and walk them through and be available like I am. So again, that relationship is super crucial. When you work with someone like you, Tina, I know that the clients aren't just a number.